ครับและในลำดับต่อไปนะครับจะเป็นเวทีการอภิปรายจากผู้แทนจากต่างประเทศนะครับในหัวข้อ Alternative 21st Century Democracy and Governance Amid New Political Challenges นะครับโดยผู้ทรงคุณวุฒิและผู้มีประสบการณ์จากต่างประเทศมาร่วมกันอภิปรายบนเวทีนี้นะครับซึ่งในเซสชันนี้จะได้รับเกียรติจากดร.ชิงชัยหาญเจนลักษณ์นะครับซึ่งท่านเป็นอดีตสมาชิกสภาปฏิรูปแห่งชาติและท่านเป็นประธานกรรมการจัดงานประชุมวิชาการสถาบันพระปกเกล้าครั้งที่ 18 ขอเสียงปรบมือให้กับท่านด้วยครับ
Well, welcome back to the Congress, and it is my precious and privilege to moderate the next session, where we have our friends from US, from Germany, and from Philippines to share experience with us. So may I now ask Hicken, Siegfried Herzog, and then Sequendo Joachim to join me on the podium, please. Well, let me just briefly introduce our three speakers, our panelists. Alain Hicken, he is the Associate Professor, Department of Political Science at the University of Michigan. He has his PhD in Political Science, International Relations, and he has wrote so many articles and books that it would take me half a day to go over it, so I better not. But just to mention that he received, the Best Paper Award and Southeast Asia related group, American Political Science Association, and he's been the Fulbright Research Fellowship for this in Thailand. So I think should give him enough credential. The next speaker is Herzog. He is the Regional Director of Southeast Asia and East Asia for the Felix Norman Stiftung for Freedom in Bangkok, an economist by training. He was previously heading the foundation country office in Manila and subsequently region office in Delhi. As the Regional Director for South Asia, he completed his Master in Economic and North American Area Study at the Eberhard Karl University to begin. His master degree thesis is on informal credit market in Bangladesh, which received an award from the Siktek Foundation. Before going to university, he got a vocational training degree in industrial management at the Porsche car company. You didn't come here with the Porsche.
Unfortunately not.
And the next one is Professor Sequendo Joaquin from the Ateneo de Manila University. He served as a project management resource person to the project Strengthening the Accountability of Political Party in Asia training program. He also worked at the Chulalongkorn University Department of Political Science in Bangkok, and with also so many articles and books. So I won't go into this detail. So I will start the session in a few minutes. But before that, let me make some statement about the related to the theme of this Congress, and also with permission from David King, also would like to make reference to what he talked to us this morning. I think what I got from him actually, and probably all of you here, it quite insight into what is really the democracy. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think what he said that the democracy cannot be taught. You cannot learn from any model, Euro-American model. It has to be inspired. Democracy is an aspiration. And he did help us to understand better the concept of constitutional monarchy. I think the crown as an institution transcending a government, I think this is a very, very, very insight explanation of the constitutional monarchy, which we should really remember. The crown as an institution transcends government. And the democracy as an aspiration is something which, Thailand is presently actively engaging in the journey to realize this aspiration. The problem of in the past, our numerous political crises in Thailand, it's just we have too many politicians, but we don't have enough what David King called citizen politicians. We have strong civil society, I may say so, but it's a civil society which cannot really transform into a civic society. Society which know both duties and rights. So we have civil society who emphasize most of the time on rights. I mean, this is just the coin to one face has to be rights and another face can be duties. So if you have one side coin, just emphasizing only on rights, it's a fake coin. And if it's a fake coin, it brings you to the fake democracy. So I think right now, I think the Thai society is engaging in the journey toward this aspiration, the creation of the true citizen, the creation of the citizen politicians. And this journey is not a smooth journey. It's not paved with roses. It has many pitfalls. So we have to be more careful at the journey for the time being, rather than just talk about the aspiration, the true democracy. I think that has to come when we achieve the journey. KPI, in our small way of working and our mandate, we try to be one of many guides for this journey toward democracy. So with this, I may leave it and ask our panelists to present his view on what we can learn from their experiences. May I ask Professor Hicken to start? You have about 25-30 minutes, and I would like to leave about 30 minutes for question and answer. I propose that we just speak one go, no, not come back, no return. It's a one-way ticket, by the way. And then we would like to have more interaction, and I understand we will stop at 5:45. Okay? Thank you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Jingjai, for that kind introduction and for your introductory remarks. And thank you to, there we go. I have a loud voice, but this helps. Thank you to Dr. Jingjai for that kind introduction and for KPI for organizing these congresses. I've been to a couple in the past, and I'm always impressed at the range of speakers, and particularly impressed with the participation that KPI is able to get from lots of different views, lots of different viewpoints. The second day of the conference, where there's breakout sessions, I find those generally very, very stimulating, very interesting to hear lots of different perspectives. And I want to, of course, also start by extending my condolences to the Thai people and to the royal family for the death of the king, and commend the conference organizers for continuing this important work, even in light of that event. Let me start with the question that I want to pose today, and I guess this is the question that probably is on everybody's mind. And in light of the remarks from our keynote speaker, this is something we all wonder about, right? How do we build an effective, a sustainable, a stable democracy? And if I were to poll this room, to quiz this room and ask you what are the most important features or characteristics of the ingredients of a well-functioning democracy, I suspect that I would get almost as many answers as there are people in this room. In fact, I ask this question a lot of my students, and I'll get on the board and I'll ask them, throw me out the conditions of a well-functioning, stable democracy, and they throw out all kinds of things. So regular, free, and fair elections, a rule of law, a balance between duties and rights, equity, all voices being represented, good outcomes for the people, respect for minorities, civil liberties and human rights, free media, checks and balances, a well-functioning bureaucracy, low levels of corruption. I mean, the list is endless. But I want to focus today on three features, I think, of effective democracy. These are simple features. In some ways, this is going back to basics, and this is not going to be anything that most of you have not thought about before. This is not brain science. But I want to talk about these three things: good voters, good parties, and good leaders. These three things are often blamed for weak or anemic or dysfunctional democracies, and I want to talk about each in turn. Let me start with the voters. Voters are one of the favorite critics of democracy, one of the favorite targets of civil education advocates. They're often bemoaned by politicians and pundits who are concerned with how democracy is functioning. And for many people, the sort of failures of democracy, wherever you are, can be laid squarely at the feet of voters. And we've all heard the stereotypes about voters who are problematic for democracy. In the eyes of many, particularly in the middle class and elite circles, it's the poor, less educated voters that are the problem with democracy. They're easily misled, they're interested only in their short-term self-interest and their immediate personal benefits. They fail to consider policy programs, policy platforms, candidates' abilities and integrity. And because of their ignorance, this argument goes, we end up with bad leaders, poor policies, and a flawed democracy. And these attitudes are present in every democracy around the world. Just a few examples from this part of the world. This is from the Philippines. Elected officials take advantage of the ignorance of the majority of the voters. If only there were a law disallowing ignorant citizens from voting. From just down the road in Indonesia, Acehese voters, like many other Indonesians, are by and large poor and uneducated villagers, easily scared, easily bribed, and easily fooled by promises. And of course, from Thailand, we have quotes like this as well. There's no electoral democracy in Thailand such as the one found in the West because most people outside the middle class lack sufficient knowledge to understand how power can be abused. As I said, though, if you find quotes like this in nearly every democracy in the world. From my own country, I'm an American. One of our founding fathers, one of the authors of the Constitution, John Adams, famously said, "The proposition that the people are the best keeper of their liberties is not true. They are the worst conceivable. They are no keepers at all. They can neither act, judge, think, or will." And Winston Churchill, famous Prime Minister of Britain, said, "The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter." This is a very common view, right? That, and there are certainly instances when voters are uninformed, where they're misinformed, although as I'll talk about, that's perhaps less of a problem than we sometimes assume. But the troubling thing about this voters are ignorant view, from the perspective of democracy and democratic stability, is that it often brings with it two worrying policy implications. The first is that some use the claim that ignorant voters can't make capable political decisions to argue that democracy just doesn't work, right? That it's just not a good fit, that a country isn't ready for democracy or that people aren't ready for democracy, and they advocate instead rule by an unelected elite or for restrictions to the franchise. So if modern politics, the idea is if it's too complex for the majority of voters to understand, then the argument goes only the well-informed should be allowed to make decisions, and only good people, moral people, smart people should be allowed to be leaders. Now, we all want to be led, I assume, by people who are good and smart, but there are two problems with this solution. The first is who decides who the good, smart, and virtuous people are. There is no foolproof test that I'm aware of that predicts ahead of time who's going to be a good leader and who will not. As a result, the most important characteristic that determines whether or not someone would make a good leader tends to be someone who looks like me. Now, not me personally, but when we look for people who we think would be good leaders, we want someone who holds our same preferences, who has the same priorities we do, who agrees with us on the interests that we deem important to us. So the people that we agree with are the ones who we deem good and smart and virtuous. Those we disagree with are ignorant and evil. And that's a problem for democracy. The second issue, the second problem with this is that even good leaders can make mistakes. Sorry, I'll get to that in a minute. All leaders, whether or not they are elected or unelected, will make errors in judgment. They will at times pursue policies that we disagree with, and some will prove to be out and out corrupt. In a democracy, when that happens, we have the opportunity, that doesn't always work, but we have the opportunity to collectively throw those leaders out of office, to throw the bums out, as the saying goes in the United States. When those leaders are not elected, we lose the ability to hold those good people accountable for when they go astray. And in fact, the very knowledge that they cannot easily be held accountable makes it more likely, we know from comparative experiences around the world, makes it more likely that those unelected, good, smart, virtuous leaders will behave in ways that place their own narrow interests ahead of the public interest. A second implication that flows from this diagnosis of voter ignorance is the need for education. And that, too, can be problematic. Now, I'm not saying, again, that voters don't sometimes make mistakes. We certainly have evidence of voters making questionable decisions. But why should this sort of blame the voter thinking concern us? Well, it reflects a dangerous prejudice on the part of some actors. The problem with these re-education efforts is they are often based on mistaken assumptions about why voters vote the way they vote. And it's an article of faith in many places that voters vote the way they vote because they're too stupid to know better, right? If they just understood, they would vote correctly. But in fact, when we look at the data around many countries in the world, and we ask voters questions about political knowledge, questions about political engagement, we find that the so-called ignorant voters are in fact more knowledgeable and more engaged than their fellow citizens. They may not be able to spout historical facts, or they may not know institutional details, but they are very aware of the issues that they care about, and they're very aware of the candidates and the parties that are standing for different sides of those issues. So most know exactly what they're doing when they cast a vote, who they're voting for and who they're voting against. The problem from some, though, is that they're voting for the wrong side, right? They're making decisions that we disagree with. So the education campaigns often end up being code for, if only they understood, they would vote the way that we vote. Right? If we could convince them, educate them, then they'd change their preferences and their behavior to look more like my preferences and my behavior. But what is it that voters actually need to know to make a good decision? What do they need to know to be competent, to vote in their interest, to be able to monitor their representatives and hold them accountable? Well, not as much as we sometimes think. At least that's what much of the evidence says. Overall, ordinary voters are much more competent than we sometimes believe and that critics sometimes allege. Now, again, this is not to say that there aren't instances where voter incompetence is an issue. There are instances where ordinary people lack access to critical pieces of information that would be helpful. The key is understanding when that lack of information is problematic and when it's benign. And when you think about it, voters have a very difficult job. When we face very complex decisions. We have lots of things we have to take into account when we enter the polling place and cast our vote. In about 4 days, I'll be casting a vote in the U.S. presidential elections. You may have heard about those. There's a choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. I will refrain from making any statements about either candidate, but I want to make a good choice, right? When I enter that ballot box, I want to cast a vote that will be in line with my preferences, my interests. So suppose that in order to do that, I'm a political scientist by training. I love politics. I read about politics, both U.S. politics and anti-politics. And so suppose that I take some time and I learn the details about these two candidates on 100 political issues that I care about, 100 policy or policy areas that are deeply important to me. That would probably be sufficient for me to cast a competent vote. I could see which of those candidates had preferences or policies that were closer to what I believed. But what about those who are normal, people not like me, who don't want to spend 3 weeks studying the 100 policy positions of these candidates? They don't have the time, the energy, or the ability to investigate where these candidates stand on 100 issues. Fortunately, we as human beings have a lot of experience making difficult choices with limited amounts of information. In fact, that's how we live our lives, right? We base most of our choices, even complex and important ones, on very simple kinds of information. Making choices this way leaves us vulnerable to mistakes, but we do it because we have no other choice. We have thousands of choices to make each day. What time do I wake up in the morning? Do I wake up on the left-hand or the right-hand side of the bed? Do I shower first or do I eat my breakfast first? Do I take this route to work or that route to work? And we cannot know detailed information about or conduct rigorous information or research about the consequences of every choice we face. And since we can't know everything, we base our choices on a few rules of thumb, heuristics, shortcuts that we adopt. We use these shortcuts every day for simple decisions like how to drive to work, which route to take to work, or what brand of toothpaste to buy. There are dozens and dozens of brands of toothpaste, but I suspect that when you go into the store, nobody spends here more than 2 minutes in that toothpaste aisle. We all have a habit. We go grab the toothpaste that we always buy and we walk out. We also use, though, these shortcuts, these decision rules to help us make big and important decisions, like where to attend school, or what job to take, or whom to marry. How did I decide to marry my wife? Did I interview all of her college roommates and her siblings and her parents? Did I ask for verification of her grades and her? Did I ask for a printout of her bank account? Did I hire a private investigator to investigate her past and give me a report? This is a big decision, right? Arguably the biggest decision that I've made in my life, and I didn't do any of those things. Had I done those things, I probably wouldn't have a wife. I would probably be in prison. But how did I make this important decision? I used a few sort of shortcuts, rules of thumb. How did I feel when I was around her? Did she make me want to be a better person? She was kind to small children and pets. I mean, it was very simple pieces of information that I used to make this very complex decision. And so as voters, so the question is, as voters, are there shortcuts, are there signals, are there cues that we can rely on that would help us reach the same conclusion as if we studied these candidate positions on 100 issues? Are there simpler sets of facts that we can use to lead us to the same choice? So maybe in this election, there's just one or two issues that I really care about. Maybe I care about education or healthcare or the size of the military or foreign relations. And I can just focus on those one or two issues, and it's very quick and easy for me to figure out which candidate has beliefs that are closer to mine. Or maybe I can rely on partisan information to help me decide. Hillary Clinton is endorsed by the Democratic Party. Donald Trump is endorsed by the Republican Party. And so when these kinds of information substitutes, these shortcuts are available, they can lead citizens to make the same choices as they would if they had even more information and if they had more details. And if that's the case, efforts to educate so-called ignorant voters, again, voters who don't agree with me, those efforts are going to fail. Voters are not voting the way they are because they don't know any better. They are voting differently from me because they have different attitudes and interests than I do. And that means that if I want those voters to change who they vote for, I actually have to adapt my policies and my appeals to address some of the interests and the preferences of those voters. Education itself is not enough. Second, let me talk a bit about good parties. Years ago, a political scientist by the name, or social scientist by the name of E. Schneider said this famous quote, and if you work about political parties like I do, you're obligated to actually use this quote whenever you talk about political parties. He said, political parties created democracy. Modern democracy is unthinkable, save in terms of political parties. Now, since he wrote this more than 60 years ago, there's actually been a lot of work in this area, and there's widespread scholarly and practitioner consensus that democracy works best when the parties work. Democracy works best when parties are strong. And yet, in almost every country, political parties are among the least trusted, least liked institutions. If you poll voters in almost any democracy in the world, they will tell you that they hate their country's political parties. They distrust their country's political parties. When you ask them to rank the institutions, political parties almost always come down near the bottom. In fact, I remember a survey from Thailand not many years ago when parties were ranked next to last on the list of institutions in terms of trust. The only thing ranked lower than parties were NGOs in Thailand, which perhaps tells you something both about parties and NGOs. And there are lots of examples, again, from this part of the world. This is from actually a Thai party leader who I interviewed in 1999. This is a leader of a party, and he tells me political parties are the weakest link in the system in Thailand. A Filipino high school student was asked to compare her country's political parties, and she replied this way: "I do not believe one species of mud can be very different from another." In Indonesia, the problem with the party system is possibly the most critical example of the limitations of post-Suharto political reform. And then this quote, this is from the Philippines, this last quote. This could apply very readily to parts of Thailand's history, particularly in the 80s and 1990s. Far from being stable, programmatic organizations, the country's main political parties are nebulous entities that can be set up, merged with others, split, resurrected, regurgitated, reconstituted, renamed, repackaged, recycled, or flushed down the toilet anytime. So why is it then, given this concern, given that political parties often end up being despised and we end up being unsatisfied with our parties, why the continued emphasis on political parties by people like me? It's perhaps not surprising that given the fact that political parties often fail to live up to their potential, it's not surprising, I guess, that there are attempts in some places to weaken political parties or do without political parties or curtail their influence. But again, let's remember why political parties are generally the linchpin of stable, effective democracy. They're actually, we could also talk about how they're important for stable autocracy as well, but let's talk about democracy. First, they are the symbolic face of democracy. These are what voters see and interact with most regularly apart from individual politicians. If they work well, voters are more likely to be satisfied with democracy and happy about how their democracy works. If they don't, then the legitimacy of democracy itself can be a casualty. They're also the workhorses of democracy. They do the dirty work of democracy. This is why we're often unhappy with them, right? They have to do really difficult tasks, and they are never going to do those tasks completely to our satisfaction. But they lower the information cost for voters, as I already mentioned. They help simplify the choice for voters and give voters simpler, clear choices. They aggregate and they articulate interests. They engage governments, and they enable citizens to hold their governments accountable. They lower the costs of campaigning and mobilization for candidates. And within the legislature, they are the vehicles that help members of parliaments, members of Congress, to overcome their collective action problems and reach bargains and decisions that are binding and that can lead to reform. More than this, they are also the main organizational alternatives to militaries. We find, again, around the globe that the stronger parties are, the more likely the military is to stay in the barracks. The weaker the parties, the more likely it is that the military will become involved in politics. They also are the key organization, the institutional actor that has a broad, long-term focus. Politicians, understandably, are most concerned with their short-term re-election and their short-term re-elective prospects and their narrow constituencies to whom they're accountable. Political parties are the actors in the system that ideally have a longer-term time horizon. They want to protect their party reputation, their long-term prospects of a party, and so they're thinking not just about this next election, but about 2 or 3 elections down the road, and they're thinking not just about a particular narrow constituency, but about the nation as a whole, or at least their supporters as a whole. Now, there are exceptions, of course, but we know that empirically, democracies perform better when parties are strong, and that democratic reversals are less likely when you have strong parties. Finally, let me talk about the final characteristic, the need for good leaders. And what do I mean by good in this case? There are lots of ways we could define this, competent, incorruptible, etc., but I have a very specific definition in mind. Namely, good leaders, and I guess I should also add good citizens, support 2 fundamental pillars of stable democracy, and that is losers' consent and winners' restraint. Let me start with losers' consent. A crucial test for democratic consolidation is how individuals and groups respond when they are on the losing end of elections. Do they agree to submit to and be governed by the winners? Do they abide by the rules of the game? Do they view the other side as opponents in the game? Or do they act as if the winning side is completely illegitimate? Do they refuse to accept the results of the election as accurately representing the views of the citizens? And do they seek to undermine and oust the elected government? It's the difference between seeing your losing side as a loyal opposition who wants to win the next election, or as an insurgent group who wants to unseat the current group that's in power. Again, we want to look at the rhetoric that's coming out of the losers after an election. Criticism and disappointment are fine, in fact essential, but rhetoric of illegitimacy is worrying. For democracy to work, you want all the major actors in the political system to hold the following preferences. I would prefer a democracy where I win. If I can't get a democracy where I win, then I'll live with a democracy where you win. And I prefer both of those things to non-democracy. It becomes problematic, though, when large numbers of leaders and citizens come to hold the following preferences. Democracy where I win is great. That's what I'd like if I can get it. If I can't get democracy where I win, I prefer non-democracy where I win. If I can't get and I prefer both of those things to non-democracy where no one wins, but I'd like all of those things better than democracy where I lose and you win. This is actually a current issue, a current matter of debate in the U.S. elections right now, where there are some candidates and some groups who are perhaps unwilling to concede the outcome of the election. We're watching very closely to see if that norm will be broken this time around, where the losers will not quietly and graciously agree to live by the results of whatever the election is going to be. Let's turn to this second pillar, winner's restraint. Democracy cannot survive if once the winner is in power, I don't know why we're going there. If once the winner is in power, they are perceived to be actively trying to punish or eliminate their opponents. Now, I'm not talking here about the usual winner gets the spoils approach to politics. It's normal for the winners to seek to reward their supporters and at some expense to their opponents. But if the rhetoric coming out of the winning camp is about the illegitimacy of the opposition, if the winner works to permanently bend the institutions of government to their advantage and permanently exile the opposition, then we begin to worry about the stability of democracy. Now, again, seeking to centralize power and working to ensure that you remain in power in perpetuity is exactly what we expect politicians to do if they have the chance, right? They want to stay in power. So what is it that keeps them honest? What induces them to show restraint? And what things make it more likely that losers are going to give their consent? Well, we know that there are a number of factors that can affect the probability that losers will give their consent and that winners will show restraint. And we'll show some of them here. First, free and fair elections. Both winners' constraint and losers' consent are more likely if the elections are viewed as free and fair, if the playing field is seen as even and everybody had an equal shot at winning the election. Second, both sides are likely to feel less threatened by the other when they are closer to each other than when they are politically polarized. The farther apart the groups are, the more difficult it is to view the other side as an opponent rather than as an enemy. Losers' consent and winners' restraint is also more likely if power is shared among several parties, and it's not winner take all, but winner take just some. Both sides are also more likely to abide by the democratic rules of the game if they believe there is a good chance that the next election there could be a different outcome. If next election they could go from being winner to loser or loser to winner. As a winner, that's going to make it more likely that I'm not going to try and break the norms of democracy because I might lose next time and those norms can be turned then against me. Finally, losers' consent and winners' restraint are more likely when there are constraints, checks, and balances on the winner. So let me close with just a final few thoughts about democracy. And I invite you to complete this sentence in your own minds. Democracy is. I've been pondering this question a lot lately, particularly in light of elections in my own country. And here's how I would fill in the blanks. Democracy is hard. It means that we don't always get what we want, as Mr. King was talking about. Sometimes we are the winner. Sometimes we are the loser. For democracy to work, though, my commitment for democracy cannot be contingent on which side of that equation I am on after the election. Democracy is also imperfect. The work of democracy is messy. Democracy embodies trade-offs, consultation, and compromise. And that takes time, and it leaves all of the actors feeling dissatisfied at the end of the day. Nobody gets exactly what they want. Sometimes democracy will succeed in producing good policies and good outcomes. Sometimes it will frankly fail. And always, always, always it will be imperfect. The key is how we deal with the imperfections in our democracies, which leads to my third point. Democracy is ongoing. Since democracy is imperfect, there is always room for improvement. The project of building an effective, stable democracy is a continual one. We expect there to be problems and weaknesses, challenges and setbacks. So when we stumble, when we fail, we don't despair and discard the democracy we have. We learn from past mistakes and we work to reform and refine that democracy. Now notice I'm using the word we here a lot. Democracy is a joint effort, and that's the final point. It's the product of our collective and cooperative endeavor. It requires sacrifice from each and every citizen, each and every group. It requires that no individual or institution is above or outside democratic laws and norms. It requires that I respect and engage with and even defend those who hold views that are different than mine. It requires that I agree to abide by the democratic rules of the game, especially when I lose. So to be sure, democracy then is no easy task, to which the current challenges in your country and mine can certainly attest. But again, to quote Winston Churchill, no one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. And I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Higgins. I think you make it very clear and we make it, you have simplify, what we talk about democracy. So I think your good voters, good parties, good leaders, that all apply to Thailand. We need to improve on those three criteria. And then I think we have to accept that the democracy is not that good regime. But I think I would quote the French word that democracy is le mal nécessaire. It's not that good, but it's necessary. Le mal nécessaire. So I think that is really come to what I say earlier, that we at KPI, we try to help the country, in this journey toward this mal nécessaire, make it improve marginally and certainly not all. And that is, I think, is the mandate of KPI, and all these people sitting here probably appreciate that. So for that, may I now ask Herzog for 25 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Ajahn Jingchai, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Sawadee Krap. Thank you for inviting me to speak at this conference on revitalizing Thai democracy. I know that it comes at a very sad and difficult time for Thailand, and I would like to also offer my condolences to the royal family and to the Thai people on the death of His Majesty the King. I do believe that thinking and discussing about the future of Thailand is an excellent way of honoring his memory. I've been asked to talk about the German experience and some lessons learned from our democracy development. And this is probably very useful because we had a very long road to democracy and we made a large number of mistakes from which a lot of things can be learned. So we serve often as a very good negative example. When we talk about democracy, I would like to put that in the context of moving societies from what Douglas North called the natural state, governance by a small coalition of elites that characterized human history basically for the last few millennia, where only a small group of elites, usually the ones who controlled violence, had access to political power, economic power, and also to legal protection. And over the last 200 years, we've moved towards more open societies, or towards open societies. As Mr. King said, it's an unending journey, but we are working on it, where people have basically general and equal access to political power, to economic power, to economic opportunities, and to legal protection. And we do that by basically three institutions: equality before the law and protection of rights, or what we call the rule of law, a competitive market economy, and participatory politics, or democracy in the more narrow sense. But very often when we talk of democracy, we also think of the other two institutional mechanisms. When we discuss this together, people from different countries, we do this because democracy is a universal political idea, and it's been adopted around the globe in different contexts. And we also know that democratization, democratic development in one country often has a very direct and strong influence on others, especially on the neighbors. We've seen this in Asia, where the '86 ETSA revolution triggered a range of democracy revolutions and reforms around the region. But on the other hand, I would also like to stress that no two democracies are the same. No two democracies also have developed in exactly the same way. So each one has taken its own tortuous history, and each one has arrived at a different endpoint. German democracy is very different from American democracy, and Japanese democracy is yet a completely different system. So the culture of each country, of course, shapes the final outcome. There's no copy and paste solution. On the other hand, countries can and do learn a lot from each other. So we are discussing in this context. What's the challenge of democracy? Basically, there are 4 issues that democracy has to solve. It has to manage this peaceful transition from limited to open access. That's especially the case when you have a democratic transition, as we are facing now in Myanmar. Then democracy has to keep the system's legitimacy by basically solving problems of the society effectively, more effectively than other systems. People opt for democracy because they hope to get a better life, to get their problems solved. So problem solving is also one key challenge for democracies. Then, what Mr. King also mentioned, harmony, managing diverse interests through negotiation and compromise. We do have diverse interests in society, different groups, different preferences, and democracy offers a way to sort that out in negotiation. And lastly, democracy also has to keep those 3 institutional mechanisms in balance that I mentioned: rule of law, market economy, and democracy. If you have the preponderance of one, it will not be stable. If the market rules everything, it's not stable. If politics rules everything, it might destroy freedom, or it might destroy especially the freedom of minorities. If the law takes over too much, you overregulate, and you overregulate the economy to death. So democracy is also a challenge to keep a balance of these three systems, these 3 mechanisms. I've given you also a paper on the evolution of democracy in Germany. One of the characteristics of our process is that in Germany, the rule of law, the protection of rights, the independence of judiciary really evolved first. That goes back to the 18th century and was largely done, or mostly done, by the time the Industrial Revolution really took off in the middle of the 19th century. And market economy and industrial revolution were more or less done by the time we really finally got a democracy. Our democracy was a much more tenuous and much more contested issue. Rule of law and market economy developed organically. Democracy came with a lot of upheaval. Our first democracy revolution in 1848-49 was a failure, and it didn't establish a democracy. The next 1918, 1919, after the defeat in World War I, we had a revolution and established our first democracy, the Weimar Republic. But that was a democracy that was short-lived, that was overwhelmed by various crises. It was ended in the Nazi dictatorship, and after the Nazis' utter defeat in 1945, we re-emerged and built a new democracy that we have been able to keep till today. So this was a far more torturous history. What are the building blocks of our democracy? What do we consider important? One is, of course, Germany, like Canada, is a federal system, a federal country, because the country was unified originally as an amalgamation of kingdoms and principalities. And this is in our social DNA. And it gives also scope for local identities, for regional identities. Even though we all speak German, we have our dialects, we have our own traditions, and this is important. Then Germany also has a very strong and very long tradition of local government. My own hometown, Biberach, was a free imperial city since 1250. So the city has a history of 800 years of self-governance, of running its own affairs, only with a very loose oversight from the empire or other powers. And hence, a lot of people are used to having decisions made at the local level and implemented with local resources. Then we also have a close cooperation with civil society in most areas. Civil society, as Alexis de Tocqueville wrote famously in Democracy in America, is really one of the building blocks of a democracy. And in my home village, most people will belong to some voluntary association, to the music club, to the sports club. And these clubs are mandated by law to follow democratic procedures. So you grow up having regular elections to the president and the office bearers of the sports club, and these elections have to follow democratic procedures. They have to submit a budget, and the members also vote for auditors who audit the finances of the club. So all the things that parliaments are doing are reproduced and are done at a small level in tens of thousands of associations all over the country, where people basically imbibe the traditions and the norms and the mechanisms of democracy in their daily life in non-political or only indirectly political circumstances. And then these voluntary associations and the other elements of civil society then play a big role in politics, in local politics. For example, when our village wanted to build a sports hall, the local associations donated resources and labor. So it wasn't just financed by the state, it was co-financed, co-built by voluntary associations, and they have the right to use them, to use these facilities, not just the schools or not just the municipal government, but also the voluntary associations. They have a stake and have part of the ownership. And this is reproduced in all sorts of fields. The churches run a lot of hospitals and schools that are getting also co-financing from the state. You have the trade unions who run a medical service. You have the chambers of commerce who basically are in charge of our vocational training system. The government has given it legal shape, but the real drivers, the real bosses of the vocational training system are the chambers of commerce. And even in foreign policy, Germany interacts a lot with its civil society that is engaged in development aid or with think tanks, and they are cooperating with the government in discussing, formulating policy. So when our parliament debates a particular issue in the country, they will talk to German civil society that has experience in the country and take that expertise on board. And lastly, of course, we have pluralism in the media. We have a strong public media sector, which is not run by the government, but run by a board where politicians, government, and civil society exercise oversight. So we wanted to avoid having just a state broadcaster, but it should be a really public broadcaster. And of course, we have a strong competition policy that doesn't allow too much media concentration in the private sector. So these are elements of our democratic system. The deeper ones are that our system is built towards incentivizing compromise and consensus. So our parliament is unlike the Canadian or the British parliament. It is far less confrontational, and much of the legislative work is done in behind closed doors, where opposition and government negotiate things out and take each other's views into account. The budget committee is always chaired by the opposition, and the opposition parties in parliament get more money for their own researchers and staff so that they have a bit of equality of arms. So in this system is reproduced at the state level and at the local level, so that the opposition usually gets a stake in the system and has a role to play and has an incentive to find compromise and consensus. And this is partly because of our contested history and our trauma with too confrontational politics. We've also done something else. We've taken a lot of key institutions basically out of the hands of politics and made them autonomous to a large degree. Obviously, the judiciary, including the Supreme Court, in Germany you cannot appoint judges without the consent of the opposition. So we always looked with bafflement at the American battles over Supreme Court nominations, because in Germany that would be inconceivable. We wouldn't dream of ramming a Supreme Court justice through against the will of the opposition. And if the opposition really hates a candidate, he doesn't get proposed. And he doesn't get elected, because you have to elect them by a 2/3 majority. The central bank has become famously independent. Now, of course, it's been subsumed in the in the euro, and let's not talk about that for a moment. Then we have the Competition Commission, again a strong independent audit and as well the Federal Audit Office, that is really the bane of governments at all levels, that is very strong and that exercises strong oversight. And it can do that because it's not seen as a tool of the central or the state government. One lesson that we learned from our troubled history was that it is not just to build the institutions that I've just described, the institutional mechanism, and to design institutions better and to take some institutions out of the hands of politicians like the central bank because they've misused them for hyperinflation. We also realized that we need to build a democratic spirit. You said Germany's failure in the 30s was also a failure of followers, and that is something we took on board, that we didn't have, it was a democracy with too few Democrats, and that too few people were really willing to stand up for democracy, fight for democracy, and engage. And it is not the case that the majority didn't want a democracy. The last question when that was posed was in 1932 at the presidential election, where Hitler got 37% and the candidate of the Democratic Republic, Hindenburg, got 53%. So in 1932, a clear majority of the German people expressed their preference for democracy. 9 months later, they didn't have one anymore, through political and legal maneuvers. So it's not that we had no Democrats, but we didn't have enough Democrats who stood up for democracy and engaged and allowed a very radical minority to take over. So we decided we needed a strong push for civic education, for building democratic spirit at all levels. So it's, of course, part of the school curricula at all levels. We also have autonomous institutions of civic education that does research and publication, and that's at the national and at the state levels. And we fund civic education initiatives by civil society. So you wouldn't believe how many civic education programs are run by churches, by trade unions, by adult education centers all over the country. So there's a whole ecosystem of civic education that we've built up over the last years, and that's an important element. Our own organization, the Political Foundations, is part of this ecosystem that also produces more politics-oriented research, training, and policy dialogue. Now let me turn a bit to the challenges that we face these days in Germany and elsewhere. One, of course, is when we have long-standing problems that are unsolved, that undermines the legitimacy of the system because people feel that the democracy is no longer able to solve the problems, and they look for simple solutions or someone who promises them to solve the issue. So unemployment would be one. Public safety has become a big concern in Germany, and also sometimes quality of delivery of services of the government. That's an issue in Berlin where you have to now almost take an appointment a year in advance if you want any simple thing to be done by the local administration. Then we have a very basic problem that the rapid and social and technological change that we experience scares people. I believe this is something human. We are built in the Stone Age, in an unchanging world. This rapid change that we're experiencing during the last 10,000 years, and especially during the last 200 years, that's scary. We don't like that our world changes so much so fast. And this is a challenge that we cannot escape from. Then, of course, we have the issue of immigration. Each community has its own narrative, its own history, its own dreams, and when you have immigration, you need to accommodate people with their own histories and their own dreams, and you have to find a new way to integrate that. That's a challenge that we have at the moment in Germany, and we are looking at Canada to help us teach a few lessons how to do that better. We have a return of populists and demagogues. I will not name names, but we have them also in Germany, with people who basically promise very simple solutions and say, the world is not complex, it's all simple. Those who rule us are hiding the truth from you, and I have a simple solution, and if you trust me, then I'll fix it all. Anyone who knows the world a little bit knows that this is all a lie, that the world is actually complex, that the solutions are not that simple, and that no single person can fix it all, but it's still something that recurs time and again in politics and in democratic politics. And we also have the danger that sometimes people win elections and then use their power to basically do away with democracy and democratic freedoms and all restraints. This is basically when democracy takes precedence over rule of law, over basic rights. We also have an issue where society just changes. As society becomes more prosperous, it allows more individualism. Ties of family are simply less important in a society that has strong legal protections and a strong safety net. I come from a conservative Black Forest farmer family, so I have 37 first cousins. I still know the relevance of families that can relate to the importance it has in Asia and that it is an important safety net and an important support network. But in Germany, it's no longer that important. It's only nice to have, but no longer absolutely necessary to have. And hence we are faced with the dissolution of traditional ties. Religious beliefs weaken, especially in Europe, not so much in America. We have traditional organizations, big organizations that used to organize practically all of society, whether it's churches, political parties, trade unions, they're all hemorrhaging members. So they're becoming less and less representative of the majority. And we have, even in civil society, we have a lot of new groups, and hence we also have a fragmentation, that you have now a plethora of groups clamoring for attention. And in the field of communication, traditional media is in crisis. Newspapers, the newspaper business model seems to be dying, and we don't know what will replace it. Traditional communication instruments hence lose relevance. People also use less television and use more the internet. We have new social media, but that is far more fragmented than the old system. So we don't really have a national conversation anymore. And that is a problem for democracy when you feel that society is fragmenting into different echo chambers. So what can we do about it? Obviously, I'm not a demagogue, so I'm not telling you I have all the answers or the answers are simple. I do believe that we need to work hard to preserve open societies because they have really produced unprecedented prosperity in the last 200 years. There's been nothing like it in Asia since the Second World War. The percentage of people in absolute poverty has declined from 60 to 3%. And we know that progress in all fields requires new ideas, and new ideas require freedom to think the unthinkable or say the unsayable. Authoritarian systems, yes, sometimes they can keep up either by exploiting natural resources, the oil monarch, the oil dictatorships like Russia's Putin, or like China allowing economic openness, but neither are very sustainable because natural resources can run out, prices fluctuate, and if you allow openness in one area like China does in the economy, that has ramifications for the rule of law because people then want property rights and want contract security and they want impartial judges to enforce those. And the party is not willing to allow impartial judges. And when people get richer, they also want to have more of a say. So all these things, I think, in the long run are not sustainable. So that is my pitch why the open society or open societies are still necessary and relevant. We have to improve our problem-solving capacity. All too often democracies have avoided painful reforms and that comes back to haunt us. So we need to have a bit more courage in governance. I believe quite a few problems can be solved by decentralizing decision-making more. We've got a tendency to always centralize, and the European Union at the moment is a bad example of that, and I think part of the problem we have is that we have centralized too much. But we also need to encourage more of a broad consensus about the basic values and institutions of a democracy, and I think, if you allow me to say so, what we see in America at the moment, that even the integrity of the election is no longer accepted, that is a symptom of a malaise that we have to push back against. Education, of course, is one key area. We need to reform our education system to give people more creativity, more problem-solving skills, to make them able to deal with all these changes that we are facing. Also to give people a clearer idea of basic institutions. When 1/3 of people doesn't even know what the basic structure of the country is and what parliament does, we have a problem. And education is also needed to give marginalized groups better opportunities. We often spend the most in rich areas, and poor areas get poor schools, and that needs to be reversed. We need to strengthen the cooperation between governments and civil society to harness the flexibility and creativity of civil society. All too often we rely in the West now on government bureaucracies to solve problems, when often civil society can manage this better. And that also means we should reduce the overreach of governments. Governments in the West have become basically responsible for everything, and people look to the government bureaucracy to solve each and every problem under the sun. And I think that has overwhelmed the capacity of states, and we need to cut back and focus on priority areas that are most important for people. And obviously we also need to encourage more international exchange of ideas and best practices between governments and civil society. The Qatar Foundation, for example, holds excellent conferences on new ideas on education and how to reform education. And I noticed that in my own country, Germany, where the education system needs a lot of improvement, very few people even are aware of such global exchanges, and they don't attend. So this is an issue that pains me, that we often are too arrogant to look at solutions that are developed elsewhere and where we can learn from. Lastly, I think we also need to develop communication strategies for social media, that we need to push back against the simplifiers, that we need to explain complexity, resist gossip and fake news, and improve transparency of the conversation, and build new communities. We are just at the beginning of this whole process of reorganizing our society around the internet, around digitalization. It took decades to reorganize our society, first around the railway and then electricity and the motor car. We have to do the same with digitalization, with new social media, and no one quite knows how that has to happen, but it has to happen. So we have to think about how do we incorporate these technologies, how do we maybe restructure our organizations, our institutions around these new technologies, that our big organizations, our traditional organizations need to increasingly ask the question, what are we really needed for? What is the message? What is part of our message that is still relevant? And we have to ask people more what they expect from us, what they require from us, and how they require us to act. Very often, organizations, including political parties, say, how do I maintain my power? How do I maintain my seat in parliament? How do I maintain my membership base? Rather than asking the more painful question, am I still relevant? And what is it that people need from me? And how do I need to change to meet that need? And I think that is what we need to think increasingly in terms of how do we integrate new social media technological change into our society by having a clear idea that we need to manage the complexity of the world, that we need to push back against the simplifiers and the spreaders of rumors, and that preserve the openness and transparency of society. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Also, I think just a few points I would like to emphasize. I think you have confirmed that no two democracies are the same, nor have developed the same way. And I think you have really proven that, by describing evolution of German democracy, it's a proof of what Professor Hicken has already mentioned about 4 characteristics of democracy: being hard, imperfect, ongoing, and joint effort. But I think for Thailand, I think I would like to come back again to the civic education. This is what we need more, and we can learn a lot from Germany. We have very weak civil society, while in Germany you have what I would call it responsible civil society, or I even call it the civic society. And this is what we really need. And this is one area which we can learn from Germany. So I think, and then the way forward would be quite common, how to go about it: education, open society, preservation of basic values. But we cannot move forward and improve on the what Professor Higgins mentioned, that good voters, good parties, good leaders, if we are not successful in creating civic society in Thailand. So now, may I just ask Dr. Sequando, you have about 25 minutes as well.
Good afternoon. Before we start, can you please just roll your heads so you... I know that you're still listening. I would like to start by expressing my condolence to our friends, the Thais and the royal family on the demise of the beloved king. And I know that this is somehow tied to your effort to look into your governance system and democracy. Hopefully, the King Prajohipok Institute will be able to give additional inputs into this process that you're undergoing. My insights are on getting democracy back on track, coping, healing, and transforming mechanisms. And the visual you see there says that preference for democracy, this was in 2005, and you will see there Thailand with something like 74% of the people saying they prefer democracy to any other form of government. Well, let me give you a little background. The term retreat from democracy is meaningful for Filipinos. And we have rich Filipino insights on the rise and ebb of democracy. And here we're talking about tides, as well as powerful surges like the People Power Revolt that we've had. The Philippine struggle for genuine democracy is now 116 years old. And it's not just since the post-war, as many analysts would put it. The Marcos dictatorship in 1972 to 1986 was the first retreat from democracy, or retreat of democracy that we experienced. There has been some form of democratic retreat also in each of the succeeding administrations, meaning Corazon Aquino, Ramos, Estrada, Arroyo, and Aquino, and it's something that is always on our minds. Democracy is a multidimensional balancing act. If you touch one aspect, it will certainly have a repercussion in other aspects. And from where we stand, basically our learning is that unresponsive, unfeeling democracy is cause of retreat of democracy in the Philippines. And I refer here to what Siegfried was talking about, unsolved problems, reducing legitimacy. As to the trends and patterns in the retreat of democracy, we all know that Huntington already talked about 4 waves of democratization. We thought that it was going to be a sustained incremental process of democratizing the world. Fukuyama once said, democracy is the only game in town. And now we find that evidence-based retreat of democracy worldwide is, well, shown by Freedom House data. We have a nagging sense that the more freedom of choice, the less is actual sense of control as far as the people are concerned. There is a crisis of representation. While we have a lot of parliaments, there is an urge to regain the people's control of politics and development. There is a crisis of essence of democracy. It is rich in process, but apparently it is poor in outcome. Inclusive democracy means that the people at the base of the pyramid must develop faster than the rest of society if they are going to catch up. But how are you going to do that? They are going to move faster than the elite, the middle class, and there has to be some radical reforms to make that happen. The revolution of rising expectations is there. We are now talking about the revolt not only of the lower class but also of the middle class. Democracy seems to be without a backbone, meaning integrative institutions and programs. We also find defective democratic constitutions, and they continue to be with us, and there is some difficulty in changing them. For instance, in the Philippines, we have something like 5 to 7 presidential candidates each time. Yet there is no runoff election, so that whoever wins president does not really get a big chunk of the votes. And that is a formula for fragmentation and divisiveness down the road. There is a need to accommodate new conditions, such as climate change, hazards, and social media as an instrument, sometimes a weapon, against democracy. Climate change, for instance, makes people who are already poor more vulnerable. And the impatience that they have is simply that government doesn't seem to be able to help. We need also to mind the global picture. Kurlansky, who talked about the retreat of democracy, is now saying or asking, is the retreat of democracy irreversible? In what ways may democracy be considered in retreat? I can think of 3 ways. First is democracy is stagnant, meaning it is a non-functional democracy. It does not deliver the goods. Second, democracy is off track, meaning it is no longer a democracy. It is an autocracy. Or democracy is inchoate. It is pretending to be a democracy, when in fact it is not. Now, what are the manifestations of democracy in retreat? We already have talked about the loss of legitimacy of democratically elected leaders. In my country, after the honeymoon period, the president has less and less political support, and sometimes it is even negative as his term ends. We are susceptible to populist messianic leaders. There is the emergence of true believers, citizens who are fanatical and are truth-proof. Shackling of the mainstream and social media, curtailment of liberty, even the abandonment of democratic constitutions or norms, trying to consider autocratic alternatives. And examples of, say, Singapore are very much sought after. We also have loss of public support for democratic governance per se. When you look at the way voting trends are going down, there is less and less support for democracy. What are the factors for democracy's retreat? In the case of our experience in the Philippines, it seems to be the frustrating performance of democracy against poverty, inequality, crime, corruption. Sometimes even simple problem solving as solving the traffic in Metro Manila. That can bring down the government. Lack of empathy, facelessness, and impersonality of democratic governance, and which is why populist, personalistic leaders have so much appeal. They are supposed to be genuine. Cumbersome processes of democracy, constant and confusing noise of democratic discourse, and what you might call civic engagement fatigue. You can also talk about cross-border influences, positive or negative, of neighbors who are democratic or not so democratic. As the consequences of the retreat of democracy, we can already see loss of fundamental freedoms, shrinking space for discourse and participation. There is aggressive manipulation of public opinion and involvement in governance, suspension of democratic processes, elections, rule of law. There is an increased importance of bureaucracy, technocracy, the military, and a leader's cronies. And there is a scramble to deliver developmental outputs, focusing on the delivery of public services, but not on democratic processes. Of course, in the end, you have a full-fledged autocratic government that might develop. Then we ask ourselves, what are the coping, healing, and transformative modalities for democracy? Well, some of the things that we looked at in the Philippines was, is it possible to firewall between politics and the bureaucracy? Meaning to say, is it possible that your president can be cursing all the time and talking about shifts in policy, but the bureaucracy can continue on steadily delivering services and modulating or moderating these policy statements of a president? The last time we had that was when Gloria Macapagal Arroyo was president, and she was so unpopular with the negative public satisfaction rating, but her cabinet continued to work and sustain the trust of people in government. Having a coherent, competent, and confidence-building cabinet can be a coping mechanism. So choosing who you put up there to solve the big macro problems of the country can be a coping mechanism. Third, relative independence of the bureaucracy, insulating it from political influence of the politicians, can also be a coping mechanism because it allows government to continue working and serving the people. As to the healing mechanisms, we all know that emergency rule has always been the standard response. Declare martial law for a temporary period until a crisis in peace and order, economic, is overcome. And there has always been a attractiveness of charismatic populist or messianic leaders, and there is an increase in symbolic outputs that apparently work with the masses and perhaps also the middle class. As to the really transforming mechanisms, I think generally they will have to be constitutional reform, repairing vulnerabilities, strengthening critical institutions. And I think Thailand is following this path. Reinventing governance, which means to say, even given the existing constitution, you routinize inclusion, participation, and consultation, because this is really the gap in democracy, the extent to which it includes the people in participating and in the benefits of democracy. A third one is roadmap to democratic governance. And the idea here is you have to strategize higher levels of democratization as an output of governance. You cannot just leave maturation of democracy to happenstance. And when you ask who in society are thinking of these things, then you find that there is none. Professor Hicken already talked about the political parties. Can you expect them, for instance, to go to the level of ideological reconsideration, rebalancing that Professor David King talked about? Who is going to look at this meta field of where democracy is going into the future? And I talked about the principles of reinventing government. And those of us who really look at what happens at the ground level can see that while these principles have been there since 1992. For instance, catalytic government, steer rather than row. You don't have to build the roads yourself if you are the Department of Public Works and Highways. Go into contract management, get the private sector to do it. Community-owned government. You're talking about local governments, local peoples taking care of their own problems and giving them the capacity, the opportunity, and the resources to do so. Competitive government, injecting competition into service delivery, whether in the public sector or the private sector. So many of these things. Mission-driven government, transforming rule-driven organizations. So many of our bureaucracies, even in democracies, or especially in democracies, are so rule-driven, they don't know what the rules were for in the first place. They just continue to implement them. One of the cases against the previous Aquino administration was that people were finding bullets in their luggages when they are leaving, and they are subject to extortion. But that went on for months, trying to solve the problem of how did these bullets get into the baggages of leaving Filipinos in the first place. And much of the anger at the administration was because of these bullets. And there was no creativity to be able to solve that problem, simple problem. Customer-driven government, meeting the needs of the customer, not the bureaucracy. Many of the reforms in bureaucracy are for the bureaucracy, not for the customer. Anticipatory governance, prevention rather than cure. In the Philippines, that is hit by 20 typhoons every year, about 3 of them super typhoons. You have to preposition repair equipment that will build the roads, but the procurement laws prevents that from happening. So you will have to let the calamity happen, declare a state of calamity before you can spend the money. Decentralized government, from hierarchy to participation and teamwork. Yes, we have a decentralization law, but it has not been reviewed since the time it was passed in 1991. The Constitution says review every 5 years, and the elites have not done so. And lastly, market-oriented government, leveraging change through the market and making sure that the private sector is properly motivated to do many of the things that government cannot deliver. But I think the most important transformative mechanism is really to have a roadmap. And there are so many studies on what ails democracy in very specific societies. I was part of a group that did the Asian barometer surveys, and we could tell what the weaknesses of democracies were. And if you just studied this, you would be able to come up with a roadmap. For instance, in the case of the Philippines, and this is an interpretation, we have to start with constitutional reforms. As I was telling you about our presidential system, our elections, our political parties, which I agree to be the weakest link in our system. The reason why voters cannot make an intelligent choice is because there are no alternative programs of government that are being offered. And people simply vote on the basis of the information that they provide. It would be nice if each political party that runs for the elections will give us an idea of how they will spend the 20 to 25 trillion pesos over 6 years. Tell us how they will spend that as a way of providing a program of government that people can use to decide whether to go for this rural-based, rural-oriented program or to this urban-based. But there is no such thing. Yet we pillory the voters for making a choice. And sometimes, well, oftentimes, perhaps it is a wrong choice. As you can see, there are constitutional reforms, electoral and political party reforms. Elections in the Philippines are paid for by the politicians themselves. If only we can have a campaign reform law that will let the state provide more of these resources, then it's not only the elite that will be able to run in these elections. That should lead to programmatic political competition, and that programmatic political competition should give the voters political efficacy. And that should lead to electoral participation, which will increase vertical accountability from government to the people, and horizontal accountability between our Congress, our President, and our Supreme Court. That should contribute to the control of corruption and law-abiding government, which, because then it will be able to solve problems in response to the needs of the people, you have increased responsiveness and support for democracy. But how can democracy flourish in a society that is already beset with a lot of problems and fractionalism if there is nobody who thinks about how to get the democracy purposively to an approximation of the ideal? Agreed that we are not going to reach perfect democracy, but it is a North Star that we can use for navigating. But when political parties or no institution in society comes up with a rehearsal of the future or determining the alternative forms of democracy or even development, then it's not going to happen. In conclusion, we can say that coping and healing democratic practice is not enough. That transforming is the key. And transforming democracy is about systems, not saviors, not populist leaders. Because as Siegfried was talking about, when you really identify the nitty-gritty things that you need to do to create the public spirit, to deliver public goods and services, to organize communities, there is a lot of things that need to be done. Transforming democracy in developing societies is not only about politics. It is about inclusive governance, inclusive development, and increasingly now, inclusive security. Inclusive governance means all voices count, so you have to mind your elections. Inclusive development means all dreams are plausible, so you have to provide education to people. You have to give them resources, capacities, and opportunities. And inclusive security means all lives matter. You cannot just look at governance. You have to look at all of these three needs of the people. Then democracy becomes an instrument for increasing the well-being inclusively of all of the people. So I think these are some of the thoughts that we get from the Philippine case. And the civic spirit is important. There is also an Arab saying that says, civilizations flourish when people plant trees under whose shade they will not sit. So citizens must be able to transcend time and generations. The problem that we find in the Philippines now, for instance, is that while we are the same country, we have lost institutional memory. By that we mean the millennials who are now on the scene don't know who Ferdinand Marcos was. In fact, many of them think he was one of the heroes of democracy in the Philippines, and they cannot think of supporting a move to prevent him from being interred in our National Heroes Cemetery, which is apparently possible to happen soon, which removes all of the meaning of the people power revolt that have been done in the name of democracy. So where is the institutional memory? How do people in a democracy learn from generation to generation? Whose job is it to pass the history, the learnings down the road? So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Segundo. He has he took us through these over 100 years of the experience of the democratization process in the Philippines and clearly indicate factors for democracy in retreat, which I think quite similar to Thailand. What I would like to point out that, he mentioned a few times that the in democracy, we need to accommodate new conditions and not only politics. On this, I think I can draw the conclusion for Thailand that we need to identify new conditions, and we are in the process of doing this. We need to identify them to really have a workable, revitalized democracy to accommodate those new conditions. So with this, I thank again the three panelists here, and I will open up for the floor to comment or questions, I think for the next 30 minutes. Please. Any comment or questions we would like to address to the three panelists? Please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Identify yourself too, yes.
Thank you. My name is Wolalasangwonkaew, a doctoral student, European Study Program from Chulalongkorn University. My question will address directly to the Regional Director from the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. In your presentation, you mentioned about the building blocks for German democracy. And one factor that can facilitate to this is the pluralism in the media. Could you please specify more about this?
Yeah. Well, in a democracy, the point is to get different voices heard. And that is best achieved when you also have different media outlets that service different markets and bring out different points of view. And when we talk about the pluralist media, we don't just talk about private media companies or your personal right to publish a newspaper, but that also should include one public option, a public media, that has the task to concentrate a little bit more on information, less on entertainment. That's the idea, although we're not necessarily always happy with the way our public media works. And why it's a building block of democracy, or why I mentioned it also, the pluralism in the media, is that it should also be free from direct influence of the current government. So that's why I mentioned that our public sector, our public media, has a board that consists not just of representatives of the government, but also of the opposition, of churches, of trade unions, of other social groups that oversee the public media. So in that sense, there's also pluralism in the oversight of part of the media. And here I'm talking, public media is mainly television and radio, but there are also private television stations, private radio, and private media. Why it's been important in democracy is that there were some key battles in our democratic development between the state and the media. For example, when in the early 60s, the media, one media outlet, a weekly, Der Spiegel, reported about mistakes, or rather deficiencies in the military, and that the military wasn't up to the job to defend the country. And then the government tried to sue them for treason and spilling military secrets. And there was a big scandal. And in the end, the Minister of Defense, who had taken unlawful steps against the media house, had to resign, and it almost brought down the government. So that was seen as a key battle between the prerogatives of government and the private media. So that's why I call it a building block of democracy because it enshrined the principle that the media can question the government, and if the information was obtained legally, and it was, then that is permitted.
Well, thank you. Yeah, what we need is a responsible media. I think we need it in our country as well. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Shamnan Vatanasili from Kamphaeng Phet. I'm the chairman of the Democratic, we call in Thai ศูนย์พัฒนาการเมืองภาคพลเมืองจังหวัดกำแพงเพชร under the KPI. And from listening to three panelists, I have observation that all talking about democracy in retreat. And my observation is that the last one, the experience from the Filipinos, and also the recommendation to change or to cope with the situation is to reform the system. And to me, it requires the reform process require power or must be initiated through the parliamentary system. So the question is that who's going to do it if the parliament system is filled up all elected person or the MPs. So it seems that we need another power that can initiate change at that structural level. And the last point probably I throw to three panelists. My question, sorry. If it seems that there are many factors for democratic development in the future, if we choose a starting point or entry point, the panelists, which starting point would you take and why? Thank you.
Well, I think for the first question, perhaps Professor you may want to address this, how to get good parties to start the reform process.
Fundamental struggle when it comes to reform. Oh, okay. Yep. A fundamental reform struggle, which is why should any incumbent reform the system that brought them to power? Right. That is a universal challenge when it comes to political reform. Those who are winners under the current system have very little incentive to change that system, and yet we see reform, while not ubiquitous, nonetheless is common within reform by incumbents actually happens, and so generally there are a couple of characteristics that have to happen. Unfortunately, first that usually requires a crisis. Where there is a sort of widespread feeling that the current system is not performing the way that it should, and then pressure brought to bear on the reformers who make one of two calculations. Either they become true believers and decide that in order to fix this system, they need to adopt reforms, new institutions, new changes. Or, even though in their heart of hearts they would rather resist reform, they decide that public sentiment is such that it's politically expedient that they support those reforms. And so under those circumstances, we actually quite often see reforms happening even within democratic contexts. We can think just not too recently to Thailand's experience in 1997. There are a lot of politicians who I know personally in Thailand who were not very happy with the 1997 constitution for a variety of reasons. There are some who really loved that constitution, but most voted for it, not all because they loved that constitution, but because given the economic and political circumstances at the moment, it was politically expedient that they vote for those reforms. Now that's again just one example. We do see around the globe, and the Philippines may actually be in the midst of a similar experience right now, as there are many in their constitution, where a crisis produces a focal point, and there's an opportunity for creative ways of addressing old and lingering deficiencies, lingering challenges.
Want to comment?
I think you asked about the starting point for transformation apart from Parliament. I think one of the big issues, and this is what I take from our history, is really rule of law, the independence of the judiciary and the effectiveness of the judiciary. And I think I would add also the neutrality and professionalism of the bureaucracy. Because that in our own history, that came first. And that was something that happened even under absolute monarchies, that basically allowed an independent judiciary to emerge. Famously, Frederick the Great instructed his judges, you have to find according to the law, even if I am the defendant. I may be the king, but I am also subject to the law when it comes to civil law, to property rights, and so on. So this development, I think, is really the starting point. And we sometimes neglect that when we talk of democracy. We take it a bit as given, and we say, main thing is we have elections, and then everything will be fine. When in fact, and I've seen this in the Philippines, and in India, where I was posted before, the integrity of the judiciary, especially at the lower levels, is very much in doubt. They're open to corruption. And so people, and the process takes forever. Justice delayed is justice denied. So people lose the trust in the system, partly because they don't see it delivering justice. And people feel very strongly about justice. So if we don't fix the effectiveness of the justice system, I think we're in trouble in the other fields as well.
Professor Sekund, please.
Yes, that is really a difficult problem. Why would the political elite, who are the problems and who hug the benefits of the unequal society, want to change the Constitution? But if there is a crisis and it threatens their positions, then I think there is an opening. We thought that a populist president who can inspire the killing of 4,000 people because of drugs might also be able to use the political will to make Congress amenable to changing the Constitution, because the ball is in their court. But apparently, what goes for competency with many leaders is that they don't, even if they have the will, they don't have the competency to make it happen. But this president ran on a platform of federalism, which many Filipinos think is a good solution to the many problems. Of course, the difficulty is how do you make it happen? But once you have the causal chain in there, then it is something that will solve a lot of problems in the Philippines. Because remember, the Philippines is 7,500 islands, and just coming up with a unitary system and using government and military forces to keep it intact is really not the way to do it. You really just have to give flexibility to local communities to govern themselves. So I think that is a crisis, a leader who has a natural political will. But I think it is also important that the intellectuals and the media and academe will have to start the debate on rehearsing alternative futures for the Philippines and looking at what will the reforms look like, what will they give, and educating the people on the pros and cons. Because if you just leave it to Congress without involving the people in wide discussions, then it's going to be hijacked again.
Can I comment on that? I think that last point is very important. In the midst of the crisis is not the time to begin to think about how you reform. This is where groups like KPI and others have such an important role to play at sort of setting an agenda and thinking about what kinds of reforms are possible, what kinds of reforms would improve, whether it's decentralization or changing elections or constitutional reform more broadly. And then when those moments come, those ideas are already circulating, are already there, and can be pulled off the shelf as a model that then might be tried and combined with other things in the reform process.
Thank you. Any more questions or comment? None? Perhaps I would like to conclude this session. Oh, do you have one more? Sorry.
Sorry for the delay, but I'm Montri Kanpuman, working as a chairman of political people politics at the KPI from Pichonolo province, and also I'm working now as a chairman of great program in Southeast Asia study over there. Okay, let me ask, I think from the heading of this conference, Alternative 21st Century Democracy and Governance Amidst New Political Challenge, I believe that from the keynote speaker, David King, and from the second and third, all of you, we're talking one issue that I have seen that we talk about how we can produce or create or make the people, local people can have a self-governing themselves through the civic education, through the process of public knowledge, even in Philippines, in Germany, and in USA as well. My point is that how we can create the citizenship, active citizenship in this period of in the world that they have a misunderstanding, a conflict amongst the concept of governance, the state power, and also the local power. How we can deal with these two? Because when we want to create a public or civic education, it's not only the people that can do it, but the state control, state management of that as well. So how we can change? We should change the state first or the local people first, or both way. How? From your experience in 3 countries, I believe that you can have a good response to that. Thank you.
Perhaps also can start your public education.
Well, of course, I don't know enough about Thailand to say what would be the appropriate way to do. That is something for Thais to decide. I would highlight 2 things. One element is indeed civic education, but I think the more important one is really the role of voluntary associations. So when I was in India, we were looking at reforming the law on associations because it was very restrictive and it was difficult to form voluntary associations. And there were all sorts of rules, and so effectively there were not many really spontaneous local voluntary associations. So I think that is one place to start, and to make sure that voluntary associations really are then run along democratic lines. And this is something that goes back in Germany and in the US and elsewhere really for centuries. So this is not something that we just started overnight. In my hometown, there's a voluntary association, a theater association that goes back to the late 1600s or early 1700s. So this is an association that has been there now for centuries. Our biggest festival is organized by a citizens committee that has been in existence for 200 years. And the government doesn't even have to pay money for it. They organize it all. So this is encouraging that people just organize and do their own things, whether it's theater, whether it's sports, whether it's cultural things. That I think is one important element of civic education. So we shouldn't just look at the school system. Yes, we need that there too, and maybe also civic education programs by civil society organizations, maybe by temples, who used to play a big role in education in Thailand. There's a whole range of actors that could help in creating civic education, but I think the more important part is learning by doing, and that is to making it easy and encouraging that sort of spontaneous creation of civil society associations.
Thank you. Professor Hicken, you want to add or sit down?
Well, our experience in the Philippines is that it almost always takes a mayor who gets elected to change the way democracy works in his particular city. We have the case of Marikina, Mayor Bayani Fernando. I transferred from Quezon City to Marikina, and my quality of life improved maybe 4 times because of this mayor. He stayed there for 9 years, 3 3-year terms, and after he did the tangible improvements, then the wife took over to sustain the participation by the barangay. But it was basically a local bureaucracy-driven effort. But in another city, Naga City, where the husband of the current vice president was mayor for a long time, Jesse Robredo, who would have been president of the Philippines if he were not killed in an airplane crash. He was able to demonstrate that as mayor, he can give flexibility and participation to people. He was able to show that the people can make their decisions, can implement them, and can sustain local democracy, and it works for the development of Naga. In fact, they were able to create a wider Naga surrounding local governments. But in my experience, it takes a single person like that to jumpstart everything. But once the people see the benefit of participation, then they sustain it. Even if the mayor is no longer there, they will insist that the improvements remain.
Just, I guess, more.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just one comment on civic education, maybe building on those 2 points. Let me, I guess, mention what I don't think works at all at this, but this is often the character of civic education campaigns that I've been involved with, both in the United States and the Philippines and Thailand and Indonesia, and that is we're going to go into a village and we're going to tell them what they need to do. So we're going to go in and we're going to explain, here's how you be a proper citizen, here are your duties, here are your rights, and that, having spoken to villagers, that comes across as very patronizing, right? It comes across as it's meant to, here's the proper way, here are the proper attitudes you should have, and that has very little efficacy. You leave. We leave the village and nothing has changed other than they've sat there for a meeting and nothing changes. In order to have those kind of those change of attitudes and those change of behaviors at the local level, it means going in and trying to empower groups, right? It means going in and not telling them what they should do, but learning what they want, and helping, they're training people how to, first of all, collectively decide what the problems are, what the concerns are in the community, and then helping provide tools about how together they could collectively solve that problem. But then it also means empowering those local groups to make decisions and solve those problems, even if they make those decisions and solve those problems in ways that are different than the center would prefer or the center would do it, right? So that means taking some hands out of central bureaucracy and central government and allowing local communities to chart different courses and arrive at different solutions, so you can have that kind of experimentation that we've seen in the Philippines at the mayoral level. That when civic education campaigns that are geared towards that kind of empowerment and are geared towards not education about attitudes, but education about problem solving at the local level, I think end up being much more, actually do much more to reshape attitudes than education about attitudes.
Very good. Yeah, please.
I would just like to add one experience from my long time in looking at Bangladesh. One reason why Bangladesh has developed far more democratically than, for example, Pakistan, with which it was once joined, is that Bangladesh has a tradition of 100 years of local elections, of municipal elections. And that has really built democratic spirit. And when the government in the late 80s once decentralized more and gave more money to the districts, that was hugely popular, because then people had, the local level leaders had finally money to decide for themselves what they wanted to do. And it was popular, it worked. Also, I think in the Philippines, you mentioned Naga City. Of course, the mayor also had an ecosystem of NGOs to work with, because that's very strong in the Philippines. And I've been in Naga City, it's amazing what was possible then.
Well, I think in Thailand we also have the same cases. I think we have minutes. We have time for the last comment or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all the speakers. My name is Pavina. I am the Vice President of Provincial Administrative Office of Canterbury. About the vote, we know that the vote is very important process to running the democracy, but in Thailand we have a lot of problem to run the process. Vote buying is also one of the most important problem in Thailand. So my question is, how about the vote buying situation in all of your countries, and what is the solution of these problems? Thank you.
Professor Higgins can tell you how to get good voter.
I thought you were going to say I could tell you where to get money for a voter. So actually, ironically enough, or interestingly enough, one of my things I study is actually vote buying, and I have a project with several other scholars that compares money politics and vote buying in Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia. So I could talk about this for a long time. I will not do that. But let me just say, I guess, a couple of things that may be surprising. So money politics, money in elections are certainly ubiquitous in all these countries. They come in different forms. In my country, not so much in terms of handouts to voters, but certainly money is important in other ways in U.S. elections. I think there is a mistaken assumption that many make that because money is flowing in elections, because sometimes candidates are giving out cash, or they're bringing pork barrel benefits, sapan buri, whatever you want to talk about, right? That because those things are flowing before, during, and after elections, that is why voters are voting the way they are. So the only reason voters are voting for a particular candidate or party is because they got a handout from that party. And what we've actually found is that for most voters, that's not the case, right? The money is not what's persuading. Money is doing something else, and we could talk about what it's doing. They're voting for the candidate or the party because they're in those networks with that party or candidate, or because that they prefer that candidate or that party for other reasons, and the money sort of follows those preferences rather than driving those preferences. So what does that mean in practice? It means that spending a whole bunch of time and effort focusing on vote buying itself is actually not that effective. What is more effective is actually trying to build strong parties, promote incentives for parties to talk and campaign on policy, than actually sort of campaigning or spending a lot of resources trying to chase down, candidates who are giving 500 baht to voters. Changing the systems and inducing candidates and parties to think more about policy, to campaign on policy and party programs, ends up being a more effective strategy than efforts to try and tamp out the fires of vote buying.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm sorry, but we seem to have a very revitalized discussions, and we can go on, but in view of the time limitation, well, I'm really sorry that I have to close the session, and by doing that, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our three panelists. I think we have learned a lot from them on the process, the democratization process. Many ideas from their presentation could be incorporated into the revitalized democracy in Thailand. So with this, may I ask you to join me to thank them again, please.
ครับขอกราบขอบพระคุณท่านดร.ชิงชัย หานเจนลักษณ์ประธานคณะกรรมการจัดงานประชุมวิชาการสถาบันพระปกเกล้าครั้งที่ 18 เป็นอย่างสูงครับที่ได้ให้เกียรติเป็นผู้ดำเนินรายการครับลำดับต่อไปจะขอเรียนเชิญท่านอาจารย์ชิงชัยและท่านวิทยากรทั้ง3ท่านที่ด้านหน้ารวมทั้งมิสเตอร์เดวิดคิงนะครับแล้วก็ขอกราบเรียนเชิญท่านเลขาธิการถ่ายภาพที่ร่วมกันที่บริเวณหน้าเวทีครับ
ขอกราบเรียนเชิญค่ะ
ท่านที่กำลังออกจากห้องประชุมนะครับอย่าลืมแลกหูฟังกับบัตรของท่านคืนด้วยนะครับพรุ่งนี้เราจะเริ่มลงทะเบียนกันในเวลา 8 นาฬิกานะครับ
ใช่ค่ะและอย่าลืมรบกวนทุกท่านนะคะส่งแบบประเมินให้กับทางคณะผู้จัดงานด้วยนะคะบริเวณหน้าห้องทางเรามีของที่ระลึกเล็กๆน้อยๆให้กับผู้เข้าร่วมประชุมที่ทำแบบประเมินให้กับเรานะคะ
ครับโปรดตรวจสอบสิ่งของมีค่าก่อนลุกออกจากห้องนะครับ
ค่ะสำหรับเอกสารเพิ่มเติมนะคะเอกสารของวิทยากรช่วงบ่ายแล้วก็การดิสคัสช่วงเย็นนะคะสามารถรับได้บริเวณหน้าห้องหมายเลขเอกสารหมายเลข6กับหมายเลข13ค่ะ
ครับในลำดับต่อไปขอเรียนเชิญท่านรองเลขาธิการท่านคณะกรรมการสภาสถาบันท่านผู้บริหารสถาบันพระปกเกล้าขึ้นบนเวทีเพื่อถ่ายภาพร่วมกันครับ
ค่ะขอกราบเรียนเชิญค่ะ
เรียนเชิญท่านกรรมการสภาสถาบันครับท่านรองเลขาธิการสถาบันพระปกเกล้าท่านผู้อำนวยการสำนักวิทยาลัยของสถาบันพระปกเกล้าครับเรียนเชิญบนเวทีนะครับเพื่อถ่ายภาพร่วมกับองค์ปาถกนะครับและคณะวิทยากรครับอาจารย์ทวีวดีครับเรียนเชิญครับรวมทั้งโปรเฟสเซอร์โยโกมิชิด้วยนะครับจากกริปส์นะครับครับขอกราบขอบพระคุณท่านเลขาธิการท่านผู้บริหารนะครับทุกท่านเป็นอย่างสูงนะครับและก็ท่านวิทยากรด้วยครับ